The sun was barely creeping over the horizon, casting a faint golden glow across the endless Nebraska fields, when Ellie Harper heard the crack of a beer bottle shattering against her family's barn. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, as the cruel laughter of three boys echoed through the crisp morning air. They were back again, Jake Thornton and his crew, the same bullies who'd been tormenting her and her little brother, Tommy, for months. But what those boys didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Ellie wasn't just some quiet farm girl. She was a trained Navy SEAL, forged in the fires of the toughest military training on Earth. And today, their cruelty was about to awaken something they'd regret. Hey, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our storytelling family. It's gonna be one heck of a ride. Ellie stood on the porch of her family's weathered farmhouse, her calloused hands gripping the railing. At 26, she looked unassuming in her faded flannel shirt and worn jeans, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. To the folks in the small town of Willow Creek, she was just the daughter of Tom and Mary Harper, back home after years away, helping keep the struggling farm afloat. But the truth was, Ellie had spent the last 6 years in the Navy, clawing her way through SEAL training. Only the third woman ever to earn the Trident. She'd faced sandstorms in Iraq, night raids in Afghanistan, and missions so classified she still woke up sweating from the memories. Now, she was back in Willow Creek, trying to rebuild a quiet life for herself and Tommy, her 12-year-old brother, who'd been struggling since their parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. But Jake Thornton and his goons were making that impossible. The trouble had started 6 months ago, when Ellie and Tommy moved back to the farm. Jake, a hulking 19-year-old with a chip on his shoulder, and a dad who owned half the county, had taken an instant dislike to Tommy. Maybe it was because Tommy was small for his age, with a quiet voice and a habit of carrying a sketchbook everywhere. Maybe it was because Jake sensed weakness in a kid who'd lost too much too soon. Whatever the reason, Jake and his two buddies, Kyle and Derek, had made it their mission to torment Tommy, tripping him in the school hallway, stealing his sketchbook, and once shoving him into a ditch on his walk home. Ellie had tried to handle it the civilian way, talking to the school, even confronting Jake's dad, who laughed it off and said, "Boys will be boys." But this morning, as Ellie watched the three of them toss another bottle at the barn, something inside her snapped. She stepped off the porch, her boots crunching on the gravel, and called out, "Hey, get off my property!" Her voice was steady but laced with steel. Jake turned, his smirk widening as he sauntered toward her, Kyle and Derek flanking him like loyal dogs. "What's that, farm girl?" Jake drawled, tossing a half-empty beer can into the dirt. "You gonna cry about your precious barn?" Kyle snickered, and Derek, the wary one with a mean streak, added, "Maybe we'll come back tonight and burn it down." Ellie's jaw tightened, but she kept her face calm, her SEAL training kicking in. Assess, control, act. She glanced toward the house, where Tommy was peeking out from behind the screen door, his eyes wide with fear. That look hit her harder than any punch ever could. Ellie had promised Tommy she'd protect him, no matter what. After their parents died, he'd stopped talking for months, retreating into his sketches of birds and fields. She'd left the Navy to come home for him, to give him a chance at something normal. But normal wasn't possible when kids like Jake Thornton thought they could rule Willow Creek with their fists and their daddy's money. Ellie took a step closer to Jake, her voice low. "Last chance. Leave, or you'll regret it." Jake laughed, stepping into her space, close enough that she could smell the stale beer on his breath. "You threatening me, sweetheart?" he said, his eyes glinting with malice. "You and your little freak brother don't belong here. Maybe it's time you learned that." Before Ellie could respond, Tommy burst out of the house, his voice trembling but fierce. "Leave her alone!" he shouted, clutching his sketchbook like a shield. Jake's head whipped toward him, and in 2 strides he was on Tommy, snatching the sketchbook and holding it high. "What's this?" "Huh, more of your stupid drawings." Jake tore a page out, crumpling it in his fist. Tommy lunged, but Kyle grabbed his arms, pinning him back. Ellie's heart pounded, her training screaming at her to act, but she held back, knowing one wrong move could escalate this beyond control. She locked eyes with Jake. "Give it back," she said, her voice deadly calm. Jake grinned, ripping another page. "Make me." The air felt electric, the tension coiling tighter with every second. Ellie knew she could take all three of them down in less than 10 seconds. Her training had taught her how to disarm, disable, and destroy. But she wasn't in a war zone. She was in Willow Creek, where the rules were different, and the consequences of unleashing her skills could haunt her and Tommy for years. Still, as she watched Jake tear another page from Tommy's sketchbook, the one thing that kept him grounded, she felt the lines she'd drawn in her mind start to blur. "Last warning," she said, stepping closer. Jake laughed again, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. Just then, a pickup truck roared up the dirt road, kicking up dust. It was Jake's dad, Mitch Thornton, his face red with anger as he slammed the door and marched toward them. "What the hell's going on here?" he barked. Jake's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, pointing at Ellie. "She's threatening us, Dad?" "All we did was have a little fun." Mitch glared at Ellie, his voice dripping with disdain. "You Harpers always were trouble. Keep your nose out of my boy's business, or you'll be sorry." Ellie held his gaze, unflinching. "Your son's the one trespassing, Mitch. Tell him to leave my brother alone." Mitch snorted, stepping closer. "Or what? You gonna call the sheriff? Good luck with that?" "I own this town." Ellie's mind raced. Mitch wasn't wrong. His money and influence had the sheriff in his pocket, and most of Willow Creek either feared him or owed him. She'd seen men like him before, in villages halfway across the world, wielding power like a club. But she wasn't that scared girl anymore, the one who'd left Willow Creek at 18, desperate to escape its smallness. She was a CL trained to face threats far worse than Mitch Thornton. Still, she knew she had to play this smart, for Tommy's sake. She forced a smile, stepping back. "Fine. Just take your boys and go." Mitch smirked, thinking he'd won, and motioned for Jake and his friends to follow. As they piled into the truck, Jake tossed Tommy's sketchbook into the dirt, spitting on it for good measure. As the truck sped off, Ellie knelt beside Tommy, who was trembling as he picked up his ruined sketchbook. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he whispered, tears streaking his face. "I should have stayed inside." Ellie pulled him into a hug, her heart breaking. "This isn't your fault, Tommy. None of it is." But as she held him, her eyes burned with a fire she hadn't felt since her last mission. She'd tried to be patient, to be the good sister, the good neighbor. But Jake and Mitch had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to let them hurt Tommy again. That night, Ellie sat at the kitchen table, cleaning her dad's old hunting rifle, her movements precise and practiced. She wasn't planning to use it. Not yet. But the familiar weight of the weapon grounded her, reminded her of who she was. Tommy was asleep upstairs, his sketchbook tucked under his pillow, the torn pages taped back together as best she could manage. She'd spent the evening thinking about her options. She could leave Willow Creek, take Tommy somewhere new, but the farm was all they had left of their parents. She could go to the sheriff, but Mitch's influence made that a dead end. Or she could handle it herself, not as Ellie Harper, the farm girl, but as Ellie Harper, the seal. The next morning, Ellie drove Tommy to school, her eyes scanning the parking lot for Jake's truck. She spotted it near the football field, where Jake and his crew were leaning against the tailgate, laughing and tossing a football. Ellie parked her old Chevy a safe distance away and turned to Tommy. "Stay close to your teachers today, okay? I'll pick you up right after school." Tommy nodded, his face pale but trusting. As he headed inside, Ellie watched Jake's eyes follow him, a predator sizing up prey. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd given them a chance to walk away. They hadn't taken it. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Jake and his friends started following Tommy home, taunting him from their truck, throwing empty cans at him. One afternoon, Ellie found Tommy hiding in the barn, his lip bloody from where Kyle had shoved him into a fence. "Why won't they leave me alone?" he sobbed. Ellie's heart twisted, but her resolve hardened. She spent that night digging through her old military gear, pulling out a small surveillance kit she'd kept from her SEAL days. If she was going to stop this, she needed evidence. Something to prove Jake and his crew were crossing lines that even Mitch's money couldn't cover up. Ellie set up tiny cameras around the farm, hidden in the barn rafters and along the fence line. She also started tailing Jake's crew after school, using skills she'd honed tracking insurgents in the desert. She learned their patterns, where they hung out, who they talked to, what they did when they thought no one was watching. Jake was the ringleader, but Kyle and Derek were eager followers, egging each other on. She also discovered something else. Jake was dealing pills out of his truck, small baggies, past to kids in the school parking lot. It wasn't just bullying, it was criminal. And that gave Ellie leverage. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Ellie caught Jake and his crew on camera, painting slurs on the barn and smashing another bottle against the wall. She watched the footage in her bedroom, her blood boiling but her mind cold and focused. This was her opening. She uploaded the video to an encrypted drive and sent an anonymous tip to the state police, bypassing the local sheriff. But she knew that wasn't enough. Jake and Mitch wouldn't stop unless they were forced to, and Ellie wasn't about to wait for the law to catch up. The next day, Ellie drove to the Thornton estate, a sprawling mansion on the edge of town that screamed new money. She parked at the gate, her heart steady, and pressed the intercom. Mitch's voice crackled through. "What do you want, Harper?" Ellie kept her tone neutral. "We need to talk. About your son." There was a long pause before the gate buzzed open. Inside, Mitch sat behind a massive oak desk in his study, his face smug. "You got some nerve coming here," he said. Ellie didn't flinch. "I've got video of Jake vandalizing my property, and I know what he's been selling out of his truck. You make him stop, or I send it all to the state police." Mitch's eyes narrowed, but he laughed. "You think you can blackmail me? You're nothing, girl. Get out before I have you arrested." Ellie stood, her voice low. "You've got one day to rein him in, Mitch, or I will." She turned and left, feeling his glare on her back. She knew he wouldn't listen. He was too used to winning. That night she prepared. She laced up her combat boots, slipped a tactical knife into her belt, and tucked a small stun gun into her pocket. She wasn't going to kill anyone, but she was done playing nice. Her SEAL training had taught her how to end a fight before it started, and that's exactly what she planned to do. The next evening, Ellie waited in the shadows near the old grain silo where Jake and his crew liked to drink. The cameras she'd planted caught everything. Jake boasting about how he'd teach that Harper kid a lesson tonight. Ellie's blood ran cold, but her focus was razor sharp. As the boys pulled up in Jake's truck, music blaring, Ellie stepped out of the darkness, her silhouette framed against the moonlight. "Evening, boys," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made Kyle freeze. Jake, drunk and cocky, laughed. "What's this?" "Farm girl wants to play hero." He stepped toward her, cracking his knuckles. Derek smirked, pulling out a pocket knife. "Big mistake, sweetheart." Ellie didn't blink. In one fluid motion, she sidestepped Jake's clumsy swing, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it until he yelped, dropping to his knees. Derek lunged with the knife, but Ellie was faster, disarming him with a flick of her wrist and sending the blade skittering across the ground. Kyle tried to run, but she caught him by the collar, slamming him against the truck with just enough force to make him rethink his life choices. In less than 10 seconds, all three were on the ground, groaning, their bravado gone. Ellie crouched beside Jake, her voice low. "You touch my brother again, and this is just the warm-up. You tell your dad the same. I've got eyes everywhere, and I don't miss." Jake's face was pale, his bravado replaced by fear. Who are you?" he stammered. Ellie stood, her shadow looming over him. "Someone you should have left alone." She walked away, leaving them in the dirt, her heart pounding but her mission clear. The next morning, the state police raided the Thornton estate, armed with Ellie's anonymous tip and footage. Jake was arrested for drug possession and vandalism, and Mitch's influence couldn't save him this time. The town buzzed with shock. Nobody had expected the quiet farm girl to bring down the Thorntons. Ellie and Tommy stood on the porch a week later, watching the sun rise over the fields. Tommy held his sketchbook, a new page filled with a drawing of the barn, whole and strong. "You're like a superhero, Ellie," he said, his voice soft but proud. Ellie smiled, ruffling his hair. "Nah, just a sister looking out for her brother." But inside, she felt the weight of her past lift, just a little. She'd fought for her country, and now she'd fought for her family. Willow Creek would never look at her the same, and that was okay. She wasn't hiding anymore. As the credits roll on this story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this video from? Drop your city or state in the comments below, And let's see how far the story's reached. Don't forget to like and share if you were rooting for Ellie and Tommy. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what matters.